Aisha Thompson knelt on the cold marble floor of the Kang estate's nursery, her fingers trembling as she picked up the shattered pieces of a $50,000 Patek Philippe watch. She didn't look at the diamonds or the gold. She looked at the hands, frozen forever at 4:12 p.m., the exact moment the screaming stopped. The fourth time she tried to sweep the glass, a sob escaped her throat. She prayed that if she just put the room back together, the miracle of Soo-min's laughter would return. But no miracle came. Miracles were for people with visas and bank accounts, not for women like her. The smear of blood on the white silk rug gave her exactly 0 hours. Not days, not weeks. Every second that passed was a second Soo-min was moving further into the dark. Aisha's hands shook as she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the burner phone she was never supposed to use. Outside, the Seoul monsoon season hit with a vengeance, rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows like lead bullets. The city had never seen a storm this violent. Aisha stared at the empty space where Soo-min's backpack usually sat. One discarded hair ribbon, a half-finished drawing of a safe house, a single shoe left behind in the struggle. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to breathe. She'd gotten used to being invisible over the past 3 years. The power in the estate flickered. She held her breath, watching the security monitors go black. The unbreakable fortress was compromised. Everything was compromised. Her phone buzzed, not with a ransom but with a notification for her own son's tuition back home, a bill she could only pay if she kept this job. But the job was gone. The girl was gone. She looked at the private, unlisted number saved in the phone as the dragon. She knew that calling this number was like opening a door to hell, but she also knew that Kang Min-Jae was the only monster big enough to kill the men who took his daughter. With a shaking thumb, she pressed call. The heavy mahogany doors of the Kang Logistics boardroom didn't just open, they seemed to buckle under the weight of Kang Min-Jae's exit. Inside, a dozen of the most powerful shipping magnates in Asia sat in stunned silence, their billion-dollar merger hanging in the air like smoke. Min-Jae didn't look back. He didn't offer an apology or a rain check. His phone was still pressed to his ear, his knuckles white as bone, his breath hitching in a way that would have terrified any man who knew his reputation for being made of ice. As he reached the elevator, the CEO facade fell away like a discarded mask. His posture shifted, the corporate grace replaced by a predatory, lethal stillness. He loosened his silk tie, ripping it from his collar, and nodded once to Han Seok-woo, who was already waiting with a heavy black tactical case. No words were exchanged. The dragon didn't need to roar to signal that a war had begun. 20 minutes later, the black sedan screeched into a narrow, trash-strewn alleyway 3 miles from the estate. The neon signs of the surrounding district flickered in the oily puddles, casting rhythmic flashes of red and blue over Aisha Thompson. She was huddled against a brick wall, her uniform soaked through, looking small and fragile against the urban decay. Min-Jae stepped out of the car before it had even fully stopped. He didn't offer her a coat or a hand. He strode directly into her personal space, his eyes twin voids of dark fury. "Aisha," he rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "Look at me." Aisha lifted her head, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She saw the man she had worked for 3 years, but the cold businessman was gone. In his place was the man her father had warned her about, the man who controlled the docks with blood and iron. "Every detail," Min-Jae commanded, the rain slicking his hair back over his sharp features. "Don't tell me you were scared. Don't tell me how loud it was. Tell me the height of the driver. Tell me the scent of the van. Tell me the way they held their weapons." Aisha swallowed hard, her teeth chattering. She closed her eyes, forcing herself back into the nursery. The driver. He had a tattoo on his wrist, a jagged line like a mountain range. And the van, it didn't smell like exhaust. It smelled like industrial grease. High grade, the kind used in the dry docks. Min-Jae's jaw tightened. He knew that grease. He knew those docks. He reached out, his hand hovering near Aisha's shoulder, a rare, clumsy gesture of recognition. "You did well to call," he said, the shadow of the Mafia boss looming large against the wet brick. "Now get in the car. You're the only witness I have left who hasn't been bought or buried." The black sedan was a moving tomb, the only sound the rhythmic slap of windshield wipers against the glass. Min-Jae sat in the back, his gaze fixed on the digital screen of his phone. Aisha sat beside him, her presence a frantic contrast to his frozen exterior. Suddenly, the device vibrated with a file transfer from an untraceable server. Min-Jae tapped the screen. The video was grainy, shot in a room that smelled of damp concrete and old iron. Soo-min was there, huddled in a corner on a thin mat, clutching the same hair ribbon Aisha had seen earlier. She wasn't crying. She was staring at the camera with an emptiness that shattered Min-Jae's heart more than any scream could have. Then a face stepped into the frame. It wasn't a masked stranger or a rival kingpin from the Southern Territories. It was Park Joon-ho. Joon-ho had been at Min-Jae's wedding. He was the man who had stood guard at the hospital when Soo-min was born. For 15 years, he had been the brother of the docks, the one man Min-Jae trusted to oversee the internal ledgers of the shipping empire. Now, Joon-ho looked into the lens with a twisted, manic grin, his hand resting casually on the hilt of a knife tucked into his belt. "You look surprised, Min-Jae," Joon-ho's voice crackled through the speakers, devoid of the loyalty it once held. "Did you really think I'd spend the rest of my life playing second fiddle to a man who spends his weekends at piano recitals? You've gone soft. The dragon has grown scales of silk." Min-Jae's grip on the phone tightened until the casing groaned. "The price is simple," Joon-ho continued, leaning down to pat Soo-min's head, a gesture so predatory that Aisha gasped. "I want the digital keys to the North Star logistics hub, total ownership of the fleet, the routes, and the offshore accounts. By midnight, I want the transfer of authority signed and notarized. If I don't see the confirmation, the girl goes into one of your own shipping containers, and we both know where those end up when they go missing at sea." The video cut to black. The reflection of Min-Jae's face in the dark screen was unrecognizable. The corporate titan was dead. The man who believed emotions were a weakness had been replaced by a father who realized his greatest strength was his capacity for destruction. "Siak-woo," Min-Jae said, his voice a low, terrifying hum that vibrated in the small space of the car. "Yes, boss," the enforcer replied from the front. "Joon-ho knows the protocols. He knows the back doors. He thinks he's holding the keys to my kingdom." Min-Jae looked out the window at the passing blur of Seoul's neon lights. He forgot one thing. "I didn't build this empire with keys. I built it with fire. Find out which of our safe houses he's using. If he wants the dragon, he's going to get the flames." The silence in the sedan was shattered by the frantic chime of tablets and encrypted phones. Han Siak-woo's face went ashen as he scrolled through a cascade of red notifications. "Boss, we've been hit. Not with bullets, but with code." The shadow broker, a financier whose reach spanned continents, had begun a coordinated strike. Within seconds, the capital that fueled the Kang Empire, the offshore accounts in Cyprus, the shipping bonds in Singapore, the liquid assets in Seoul, fell under a deep freeze. It was a surgical strike designed to paralyze a kingpin. They wanted Min-Jae blind and broke, unable to pay informants or fuel the war machine needed to find his daughter. Min-Jae stared at his darkened bank terminal, his expression a mask of terrifying composure. "They think money is the only way I hunt," he whispered. "They think if they cut the dragon's purse, he can't breathe fire." Aisha sat huddled in the corner of the leather seat, her eyes fixed on the frozen frame of the ransom video. While the men focused on the loss of millions, she was focused on a single pixelated detail in the corner of the screen where Soo-min sat. "Wait," Aisha whispered, her voice trembling but certain. She reached out and tapped the screen, zooming in on the dark, damp wall behind the little girl. "Look at that, behind the crate." Min-Jae leaned in, his sharp eyes following her finger. In the murky background was a stenciled logo, partially obscured by grime and shadows, a blue anchor entwined with a withered rose. "That's not a gang symbol," Aisha said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I remember that mark. 3 months ago I was at the grocery store with Sumin. A man was wearing a jacket with that same patch. He was staring at her too long, too hard. I told the guards, but they said I was being paranoid." Min-Ye's gaze sharpened into a lethal point. The Blue Rose. That was a defunct shipping company bought out by a shell corporation 5 years ago. They were supposed to have vacated the Pier 9 warehouses last winter. The shadow broker had tried to drown Min-Ye in financial chaos, but they had forgotten about the woman who noticed the things men of power ignored. "Siakwu, forget the accounts," Min-Ye commanded, the predatory stillness returning to his frame. "Tell the men to arm themselves with whatever isn't tied to a credit line. If the broker wants to freeze my world, I'll burn theirs down with my bare hands." He looked at Aisha, a flicker of genuine respect cutting through the dark voids of his eyes. "You saw what my best soldiers missed. Pier 9 isn't just a warehouse. It's a tomb. And Jun-ho just invited me inside." The trunk of the sedan hissed open, revealing a hidden compartment lined with cold steel and high-grade munitions. Han Siakwu moved with a practiced, lethal efficiency, checked the action of a suppressed submachine gun before laying it into a tactical bag. He was a man of the old guard, a soldier who understood that in their world, power was a delicate equilibrium of fear and profit. "The war chest is ready, boss," Siakwu murmured, his voice heavy with a rasp that sounded like dry earth. He paused, his weathered hands resting on the edge of the trunk. He didn't look at the weapons, he looked at the back of Kang Min-Ye's head. "But we are crossing a line that has held for a decade. Pier 9 isn't just neutral ground, it's the border. If we hit that warehouse with this kind of heat, the fragile peace with the Southern Syndicate and the independent dock unions will vaporize. You're not just going after Jun-ho. You're starting a fire that will consume every shipping route we own." Min-Ye didn't turn around. He stood at the edge of the rain-slicked overlook, the lights of the Incheon docks shimmering below like scattered jewels. "The roots don't breathe, Siakwu. They don't call me Papa when they have a nightmare." "I know," Siakwu replied, stepping closer, his shadow stretching long under the flickering street lamp. "But as your enforcer, I have to ask, are we saving the girl or are we burning the empire to prove you still can? If you lose the docks, you lose the leverage. Without the leverage, you can't protect her tomorrow, even if we get her back tonight. The board is already looking for a reason to replace you. Don't give them a massacre." Aisha watched them from the backseat, the window cracked just enough to hear the low, dangerous hum of their conversation. She saw the conflict etched into the enforcer's face. A man torn between absolute loyalty to his master and a cold, logical fear for the organization's survival. Min-Ye finally turned. His eyes were no longer those of a CEO or a strategist. They were the eyes of a wolf who had found the scent of the man who touched his cub. "Siakwu, you've spent 30 years protecting the business. Tonight, you're protecting my blood. If the empire has to burn to keep her warm, then let it turn to ash. Prepare the secondary team. We hit the docks at midnight." Siakwu closed his eyes for a brief second, a silent acknowledgement of the chaos to come. He reached into the chest and pulled out a heavy vest, handing it to Min-Ye. "Then we don't go in as businessmen," the enforcer said, his doubt buried under a layer of grim resolve. "We go in as the monsters they think we are." The heavy iron gates of the Kang estate hissed open once more, but this time it wasn't a soldier who entered. Detective Choi Yoon-kyung stepped out of an unmarked sedan, her trench coat dark with rain, her eyes scanning the perimeter with the weary precision of a woman who spent her life looking at shadows. She didn't wait for an escort. She strode into the grand foyer, her heels echoing like a countdown against the marble. She found Min-Ye in the center of the room, his tactical vest partially visible beneath his tailored coat. The air between them hummed with a decade of unspoken history. Choi knew exactly who stood before her, not the logistics titan on the cover of Forbes, but the dragon who had painted the docks red to build his throne. "I have 2 warrants in my pocket, Min-Jae," Choi said, her voice a low, dangerous rasp. "One for the illegal munitions your men are currently loading into those SUVs, and one for your arrest. If you step off this property with that heat, you aren't a father looking for a daughter. You're a warlord starting a gang war. I'll have the riot police here before you hit the city limits." Min-Jae didn't flinch. He looked at her with eyes that had long ago discarded the concept of mercy. "The police take statements, Choi. They file paperwork. They don't find children in the time it takes for a heart to stop beating. Move aside." "I can't let a ghost run the streets," Choi countered, her hand hovering near her service weapon. "The law doesn't make exceptions for blood." The standoff was absolute until a small, desperate sound broke the tension. Aisha stepped forward from the shadows of the hallway, her face tear-streaked and pale. She didn't look at the detective's badge or the boss's guns. She reached out and grabbed Choi's arm, her grip frantic. "Please," Aisha whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't look at his files, don't look at his name, just look at the room." Aisha led the detective toward the nursery. The door stood open, revealing the shattered glass, the overturned table, and the single, lonely shoe left on the white rug. The silence in the room was deafening, the kind of silence that only exists where a child should be. "She was waiting for him," Aisha sobbed, pointing to a drawing of a stick-figure man and a little girl. "She was holding her favorite doll. Now there's just glass. If you arrest him now, you aren't upholding the law. You're signing her death warrant. Please, look at the playroom, not the man." Choi stared at the empty space, her jaw tightening. She looked at the drawing, then back at the dragon, who looked more like a man drowning than a king. The law was a straight line, but the nursery was a jagged hole. Slowly, Choi pulled her hand away from her holster. She didn't speak, but she stepped back toward the foyer, the warrants in her pocket feeling like lead. She didn't give him permission, but she gave him the one thing the law couldn't, the time to be a monster. The neon sign for the Gilded cage flickered with a dying buzz, casting a sickly violet glow over the rain-slicked entrance of the basement den. This wasn't the polished underworld of the Kang estate. This was the gutter of the syndicate, a place where air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, cheap tobacco, and the metallic tang of desperation. Min-Jae stepped into the room and the atmosphere curdled. The clatter of mahjong tiles stopped. Men with scarred knuckles and hollow eyes looked up, recognizing the predator in their midst. Min-Jae didn't break his stride, his hand resting on the small of Aisha's back, guiding her through a sea of human wreckage. They were looking for a broker named Rat Jin, the man who moved untraceable vehicles for the city's worst sins. They found him in a back booth, surrounded by 3 bodyguards who looked like they were made of muscle and bad intentions. Jin looked at Min-Jae and forced a grin that didn't reach his shifty eyes. "Boss Kang, to what do I owe the honor of a visit to my humble hole?" "The black SUV used at the Kang estate yesterday," Min-Jae said, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "Who bought it, Jin? I'm not here to haggle. I'm here to decide if you keep your hands." Jin swallowed, his eyes darting toward his guards. "Boss, I move 100 cars a week. I don't ask for IDs. It was a guy. Mid-30s, buzz cut, spoke with a Busan accent, paid in cash and left. That's all I got, I swear on my mother's soul." Seok-woo stepped forward, his hand moving toward his jacket, but Aisha's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "He's lying," she said, her voice trembling but resonant. The room went deathly still. Jin sneered at her. "Keep the help quiet, Kang. She doesn't know how things work here." Aisha didn't flinch. She pointed at the gold lighter sitting on the table in front of Jin. "That lighter. It has the logo of a private golf club in Jeju. The same one I saw in a photo on Park Joon-ho's desk last Christmas. And look at his boots." She gestured to the expensive, mud-caked leather footwear Jin was trying to tuck under the table. "Those aren't Busan Street clothes. Those are the limited-run boots Jun-ho bought for his inner circle 2 months ago. Min-Ye's gaze dropped to the boots, then slowly rose to meet Jin's terrified eyes. The dragon didn't need to say another word. The truth was written in the sweat beads forming on Jin's brow. "You didn't just sell him a car," Min-Ye whispered, leaning over the table until his face was inches from the broker. "You're on his payroll. You've been watching my house." He turned to Seokwoo. "Break the guards. Bring the broker. He's going to tell me exactly where Jun-ho is hiding, or he's going to find out how deep the Han River is at midnight." As the room erupted into a blur of violence, Min-Ye looked at Aisha. She was pale, her hands gripped tight, but she didn't look away. She was no longer just the maid. She was the only one who could see the rot before it struck. The safe house was a hollow concrete shell on the edge of the docks, smelling of stagnant salt and old engine oil. While Seokwoo interrogated the broker in the next room, the rhythmic thud of a fist against flesh providing a gruesome heartbeat to the night, Min-Ye sat in the shadows, staring at a cracked mirror on the wall. The fever of the hunt was high, but the exhaustion was deeper. As the clock on his dashboard ticked toward 10:00 p.m., the edges of the room began to fray. The gray concrete seemed to dissolve into white lilies and the scent of expensive perfume. "You haven't changed, Min-Ye." He didn't turn. He knew that voice. It was the sound of a life he had buried under a mountain of cold steel and shipping manifests. In the reflection of the cracked mirror, she stood behind him, Jae-ah, his late wife, looking exactly as she had the day the doctors told them there was no hope. Her expression wasn't one of love, but of a devastating, quiet disappointment. "You built a cage of iron and called it a home," her ghost whispered, her hand ghosting over the tactical vest strapped to his chest. "You told me the dragon would protect us, but the dragon only knows how to hoard and how to burn. You made Soo-min a prize to be stolen because you made yourself a king to be toppled." "I did what I had to," Min-Ye rasped, his voice breaking in the empty room. "I kept her safe. I gave her everything." "You gave her guards instead of a father," Jae-ah countered, her image flickering like a dying candle. "Jun-ho isn't just a traitor, Min-Ye. He is a mirror. He learned his ruthlessness from you. He thinks Soo-min is a weakness because you taught him that love is a liability. If you go to the docks as the dragon, you will only find ashes. To save her, you have to be the man I married, not the monster you became to avenge me." The sound of a heavy door slamming brought the world back into sharp, brutal focus. The lilies were gone, replaced by the stench of the broker's sweat. Seokwoo stood in the doorway, his knuckles split, his eyes hard. "He talked, boss. Pier 9, Section C, they're moving her onto a freighter in 40 minutes. Min-Ye stood up, the weight of his tactical gear feeling like a lead shroud. He looked at the mirror one last time. He saw the cold, calculated face that had terrified Asia for decades, but for the first time, he saw the hollow man behind it. He walked out to the main room where Aisha was waiting, her eyes full of a raw, desperate hope. He realized then that Aisha had done more for Soo-min in a year than his billions had done in a lifetime. She hadn't protected the girl with guns. She had protected her with her heart. "Seokwoo," Min-Ye said, his voice stripped of its usual iron. "Tell the men to hold back. We don't go in with a massacre. We go in for the girl. If I have to choose between the Empire and my daughter, let the docks sink." The rain at Pier 9 did not fall. It screamed, whipped into a frenzy by the wind howling off the Incheon coast. Giant shipping cranes loomed over the asphalt like skeletal giants, their shadows dancing in the strobing light of gunfire. The siege began not with a shout, but with the rhythmic, metallic thwip of suppressed rounds as Han Seokwoo's team neutralized the perimeter guards. Then the world ignited. A flashbang grenade detonated inside the main hangar of Section C, turning the darkness into a blinding white void. Kang Min-Jae moved through the chaos like a ghost of the docks, his movements surgical and cold. He didn't take cover. He moved forward, his weapon a rhythmic extension of his rage. Every time a traitor stepped into the light, they were met with the dragon's fire. The air grew thick with the scent of cordite, ozone, and salt spray. While the titans of the underworld tore into each other in the center of the warehouse, a shadow moved high above the rafters. Aisha had climbed the rusted exterior ladder, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. She was terrified of heights, terrified of the dark, and terrified of the stray bullets ricocheting off the corrugated steel below, but the image of Soo-min's empty shoe pushed her forward. She squeezed her frame into the narrow, dust-choked ventilation shaft. The metal groaned under her weight, the sound masked by a heavy staccato of submachine gun fire echoing from the floor. She crawled on her hands and knees, the jagged edges of the ductwork tearing at her skin. Below her, through the slats of the vents, she saw the blurred movement of men in tactical gear and the orange sparks of muzzles. Finally, she reached a vent directly above a small, reinforced office in the back of the hangar. She looked down and saw her. Soo-min was curled in a ball under a heavy metal desk, her hands over her ears, her small body shaking with every impact of the battle outside. Park Jun-ho stood by the door, his back to the room, screaming orders into a radio as he prepared to make his stand. Aisha didn't wait for the logic of the law or the safety of the guards. She kicked the vent cover with every ounce of strength in her legs. The grate crashed onto the floor, the sound lost in the thunder of a nearby explosion. As Jun-ho spun around, distracted by the breach, Aisha dropped into the room. She didn't have a gun or a knife. She simply sprinted across the concrete, sliding under the desk and pulling Soo-min into her arms. "I have you," Aisha whispered into the girl's hair, shielding her body as bullets began to chew through the office door. "I'm here. The dragon is here." For the first time in 3 days, Soo-min's hand stopped shaking. She didn't look at the war, she looked at the woman who had walked through hell to find her. The office door splintered inward, hanging by a single twisted hinge as Kang Min-Jae stepped over the threshold. His silhouette was a jagged shadow against the flickering orange glow of the warehouse fires. Blood bloomed like a dark rose on his shoulder, and his tactical vest was shredded, but his eyes were focused with a terrifying, singular clarity. "That's far enough, dragon," Park Jun-ho screamed, his voice cracking with the desperation of a cornered rat. He had hauled Soo-min out from under the desk, his arm wrapped tight around her throat, the barrel of a black semi-automatic pressed hard against her temple. Aisha lay on the floor nearby, a bruise darkening her cheek where Jun-ho had kicked her away. She met Min-Jae's eyes, a silent plea for the child's life passing between them. "Drop the weapon," Jun-ho bellowed, his finger whitening on the trigger. "The keys, Min-Jae. Transfer the North Star servers now or I'll paint this floor with her. You've gone soft, remember. You're a father now. Fathers give up everything for their kids." Min-Jae didn't drop his gun. Instead, he lowered it slightly, his thumb clicking the safety to a different setting. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the electricity of an impending strike. "You're right, Jun-ho," Min-Jae said, his voice a low, melodic hum that chilled the blood. "I am a father, and a father's job is to remove the filth that threatens his home." "I'll do it," Jun-ho shrieked, pressing the gun harder into Soo-min's skin. The little girl's eyes were wide, fixed on her father, but she didn't scream. She saw the change in him. The way he stood was no longer a threat to her, but a shield. "You think you can trade her for my empire," Min-Jae said, his gaze narrowing until the world consisted only of the 2 inches of exposed temple on Jun-ho's head. "You think I'll negotiate a price for her safety?" Min-Jae's finger tightened on the trigger. The cold, calculated dragon had found the perfect alignment of justice and rage. "I don't negotiate when it comes to my blood." The crack of the shot was deafening, a single surgical strike that echoed through the rafters. Before the shell casing even hit the concrete, Jun-ho's eyes went blank. His grip slackening as he folded backward like a puppet with cut strings. Min-Jae was moving before the body touched the floor. He dropped his weapon and skidded across the concrete, catching Soo-min before she could fall with the traitor. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her hair, his entire frame finally beginning to shake. Aisha crawled toward them, her hands reaching out to touch Soo-min's arm, verifying the miracle. Outside, the gunfire was fading into the hiss of the rain. The empire was in shambles, the docks were a graveyard, and the dragon's throne was dust. But as Min-Jae held his daughter, he realized the shadow broker had been wrong. He wasn't bankrupt. He was finally holding everything he owned. The sirens of the emergency services were distant echoes by the time the dust settled over Pier 9. In the cold light of the following weeks, the dragon's empire didn't just crumble, it transformed. The logistics hubs and shipping lanes that had once been the arteries of an underground network were systematically dismantled and reassembled. Under the watchful eye of Detective Choi, who had chosen the spirit of justice over the letter of the law, Min-Jae's vast wealth was funneled into the Soo-min Foundation, a massive charitable trust dedicated to protecting the city's most vulnerable children and supporting immigrant families like Aisha's. The mahogany boardroom was gone, replaced by a sun-drenched office in a building that smelled of fresh paint and hope rather than cigar smoke and secrets. Han Seok-woo remained at Min-Jae's side, but his tactical vest had been traded for a charcoal suit. He now oversaw the security of shelters instead of the passage of contraband. The world had expected a gang war, but Min-Jae had given them a reformation. On a quiet morning just as winter began to lose its grip on Seoul, the three of them sat on the wide balcony of a new home, a place of glass and light that sat far above the shadows of the docks. There were no armed guards at the door, only the sound of a kettle whistling in the kitchen. Soo-min sat between them, her head resting in Aisha's lap as she colored a picture of a house with a bright yellow sun. She was no longer the silent, trembling girl from the warehouse. Her laughter had returned, fragile but real, a sound more valuable to Min-Jae than any shipping bond he had ever signed. Aisha looked out over the skyline, her hand resting protectively on Soo-min's shoulder. She was no longer the invisible maid. She was the anchor of the household, the woman who had seen the man behind the monster and stayed to help him rebuild. Min-Jae watched them, a cup of tea held in hands that no longer shook. He looked at the horizon where the sky was beginning to bleed into shades of gold and soft violet. For decades, he had believed that ruthlessness was the only way to survive, but as the first rays of the sun hit the balcony, he realized he had finally found true power. It wasn't in the fear he inspired, but in the peace he had fought to provide. "Look, Papa," Soo-min whispered, pointing at the glowing edge of the city. "The sun is coming back." Min-Jae reached out and took Aisha's hand, pulling his chosen family closer as the light washed over them. The dragon was gone, and the father had finally come home. The first sunrise of their new life had begun, and for the first time in his memory, the world was exactly as it should be.